Let's get started. Welcome, everybody, to this webinar on playbooks for running great strategy sessions. This is something Alex and I have been asked to do quite a bit this year. And what we've discovered is that our toolbox can really apply to a lot of the context that we've been asked to kind of work in. So we're really looking forward to sharing with you our experiences and all the lessons that we've learned. So this is a session. We're your host for the day. I'm Tendai Vicky. I serve as senior partner at Strategyzer. Yesterday during the company call, it turned out that I'm the longest serving employee of Strategyzer outside of Alex at the moment. So I'm like big bro to everybody. I think that's what I claim to be. So very much enjoying still my work with you, Alex. And Alex, welcome. How are you?
Pretty good. Yeah, just disappointed. I worked like quite a bit to put up my studio and tried to do it without the professionals. I thought I can handle it myself. Ultimately, I did, but the quality is not where I want yet because I didn't have my headlights for the green screen, the technical stuff, right? So I've
Nah,
been
nah,
geeking out a little bit.
exactly. It's all good. It's nice to have more, a better look than you today. So here's what we're going to be talking about today. Today we're going to cover 4 or 5 topics all in all. We're going to have Alex show us a really cool strategy playbook that he ran recently, just to give you a feel of what it looks like, particularly to run a strategy playbook on our platform. And then I'll say a little bit about the state of strategy and why we're starting to create some of these strategy playbooks to deal with that. And then Alex will talk a little bit more about what modern strategy looks like. And then after that, we'll show you 2 more playbooks, one that I ran with a large pharmaceutical company, and Alex will show you a final one before we move into Q&A. And so for this webinar, again, you can make your comments in the chat. You can ask your questions in Q&A. And as usual, all the recordings will be available within 1 to 2 weeks after we've done. So you don't have to ask that question because we always get that question in the chat, is the recording going to be available? Yes, the recording is actually going to be available. And then before I go to, much further, I'll hand you over to Alex. But actually, before I do that, let's do the Menti poll. So you can scan that QR code over there, and we just want to learn who's here today, right? So if you scan the QR code or go to menti.com and type 777-8348, so that we can just see who is here today. So let me actually load up the Menti. So here we go, a playbook for great strategy sessions. Please join the Menti and please tell us who you are here today. Are you a business leader? Are you somebody who's leading strategy? Are you a technology leader, sales leader, product leader, innovation leader? Are you a general consultant, coach, or an innovation consultant or coach? Or, if you fit the other category.
We have quite a few innovation leaders and
Yeah,
obviously quite a few coaches and consultants, right?
yeah, exactly. So, there's quite a few coaches and consultants, and a new category that we don't quite see that often. Maybe it's the title strategy leaders are also joining us today. So that's pretty cool. So
One
yeah,
of the
no, we look
things,
forward to.
yeah, I just wanted to point out, like of you who are from, general coaching or so, maybe you pick one of the organizations for the questions we ask. So if you're consulting for a company, when we ask questions about strategy, maybe you can do it for their organization. If you're, a small boutique consultancy, and or personal indie consult makes a bit less sense. The questions that we're asking today.
Yeah. No, 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 that's awesome. Welcome everyone, and we look forward to having the conversation with you today. But I'm now going to hand you over to Alex, who's going to talk a little bit about our playbooks and how you can engage with those.
So absolutely, just very quickly, because we're actually pretty excited about where we're going with our platform. So one of the things, and we just put up a poll, if you're interested in us contacting you for facilitated sessions around strategy, we run these in, on premise, remotely, depending on the context, but we always use our playbooks. And what we're super excited about is that we're making all of these playbooks accessible to everybody for $300 per person, right? So very affordable. And the goal is really to democratize kind of what we do with big, companies around the planet who put quite a lot of money, into the services we have to facilitate strategy sessions. Tendai was doing a strategy session this year. I did a couple as well. One with a 40 billion euro leading consumer goods company, actually two of them. And we want to make this accessible. Just everything we practice, the processes, the step-by-step approach in our playbooks, we want to make them accessible to everybody so you can use them even without us. So we have a couple of playbooks online today, like the strong value proposition and differentiation with Gen AI. But what our goal is to have dozens and dozens of our best playbooks out there so you can use them. So just a couple of words on that. 2026 is going to be an exciting year for us to democratize even more what we do with large companies around the planet.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, so let's jump into the content. Alex, please show them the first playbook and let's see. Also, do let us know
Okay.
if you'd like to learn more about our facilitated leadership and strategy sessions according to the quiz that's just popped up there. But over to you, Alex.
So I'm going to share one of the strategy playbooks that I personally facilitated this year. I think I did for strategy sessions with leadership teams. I did about 3 or 4 specifically, besides all the different kinds of sessions. And this is a very exciting one. I'll give you a little bit of the company context and then show you what I did. And we did this on the Strategyzer platform. And again, we're going to share these playbooks in 2026, so everybody has access to them. So this was not a large company. This was actually a smaller company that are friends of ours. It's a 20-year-old successful small, medium-sized company e-commerce player. And initially they had a very innovative business model, and that business model is working really well, and they had consistent growth over the years. So they're a really strong player. Now, they're also extremely innovative when it comes to HR and technology. When it comes to new value propositions and business models, maybe a little bit less, right? So there was a real need there to think about bold strategic moves. And because they were so focused on improving operations, they actually didn't make new strategic bold moves. So that was the request that came to us. And together with the Strategyzer team, we designed something and implemented that on the Strategyzer platform. I'll show you the environment, why they wanted to do this. It's very straightforward. New strong entrants into the market, so they had to do something. In particular, ways of AI. And the threat to e-commerce, the traditional way, is platforms that operate based on agentic commerce. So nobody really knows how this is going to look like, but if you just wait, you're probably going to get disrupted. So kudos to them to actually try to break out of the current business model. Even if it was super hard for them to do, we eventually kind of got them there, and that was a really fun process. And I'll show you what we did. Now, the uncertainty of evolving consumer needs in context of AI was kind of the last thing, which will require that they start testing some of these ideas with their customers. So let me walk you through the playbook step by step. So what we did first is, so that they had to break out of their existing business model, which was very hard for them, we created 2 scenarios and trigger questions so they would have to jump, so they couldn't stay comfortable in improving the existing. The second thing we did is, once we had all of these big ideas, so very quickly they came up with many, many different ideas, they had to synthesize them into napkin sketches, kind of make a quick drawing of a bold strategic move. Then they went into customer profiles, they went into value scenes. I'll show you a little bit of this. They sketched out the business model for the strategic move, came up with the numbers. Then they wrote down the key evidence that they already had that this was a good idea, and asked themselves, what would we need to actually test, what was uncertain, so that we could move into the future. And at the end of the day, so this was, we went from 9 until 4. At 4 o'clock, they pitched their ideas, and they got feedback from the rest of the leadership team. So if I look at that, so we went step by step. We implemented this on the Strategyzer platform with every single step that you've just seen here. And we would create visual workspaces to, pre-format everything that we go through. So we take the paper-based world, put it into the digital world, but the advantage here is also that they can run this on their own afterwards, because they now have the playbook, the templates, the workspaces. So this is the morning session that you can see, and you'll get all the slides. This is the afternoon session, so you can go back to this, and we'll go relatively quickly on some of this. Now, here's really important. The framing of the entire strategy session were two scenarios, and two teams would work on one scenario, two teams on another. The first one had actually nothing to do with the environment, but it had to do with their business model. So we asked them to imagine a scenario where they were producing 80% of their revenues as recurring. Question, how did they get there? So the whole day they would have to come up with the business model that got them there. That would be the bold strategic move for two teams that they would have to come up with. The second team had a different angle. This now had to do with the environment. They had to come up with a way to use agentic commerce, but still using their key asset, their brand, and their strong community. So very particular second scenario for two teams. So we split for the entire day into 4 teams. 2 teams worked on scenario 1, 2 teams worked on scenario 2. And the scenarios was super important to push them beyond what they're comfortable, because we already had a workshop and they were kind of stuck in improving the existing. So now if I look at kind of this last one here, the teams, each one worked through a bold strategic move, and at the end of the day, they presented to everybody else. So this was the last kind of closing session, presentations, feedback, and next steps. And that's exactly how we started the workshop, with the scenarios, but then immediately showing, okay, at the end of the day, what are you going to do? You need to present for 5 minutes. And let me see if this was the 5, actually, yeah, exactly the 5 minutes. So if I walk you through it, this is what I did with them. I showed them where they would land in the evening, what they would need to present, and how to get there. First, 30 seconds on why this big idea, this strategic move is worth pursuing. Second, why this would matter to their consumers, to their customers, so they'd have to look at the top jobs, pains, and gains. Then they would present a value scene. How does this actually create value for the customer? Because otherwise it's not a customer-centric strategy. They then had to map out the business model and how they would build on their key assets that they already have. They would show some evidence of why this is a good idea. What do they already know? Maybe they have evidence from customers. Maybe they have evidence around willingness to pay. And then the last one, the key hypothesis. What are the big things in this strategy that they would need to test? So that's where we started. Now, if we zoom into this step-by-step kind of timeline, this is exactly what we believe in with playbooks. It's a step-by-step, play-by-play, so you get ultimately to the strategy. We'll zoom into the first one, trigger questions. When you click on that, you get the entire workspace that they would work on for the full day. And we'd ask them a series of questions so they could brainstorm, come up with many, many ideas. Here, quantity was more important than quality, but I don't want to go too deep into that. What I want to show is the second thing that we got them to do is now, as a team, to map out 2 napkin sketches. And a napkin sketch is nothing else than an image of one bold idea, a second image of a second bold idea. You give it a title, and you give a paragraph that explains it. So each team would have to come up with 2, and then if I give you one example, so silly one here, a coffee subscription, one idea with a title, with an image, with a text, they would do that, and then for the first time they would present back to the other teams, to the plenary. So we'd have 4 teams presenting each 2 napkin sketches, 2 strategies each. So we'd have 8 bold strategies, so we have choice. And then each team member would perform a democracy vote where they could get some dots, and they would say, I like this idea, this idea, this idea most. I'll put 3 dots here. I have another 5 dots still, so I'll put 1 here, 1 here, 1 here, 1 here. So basically, every team member would vote on which idea they like most. And then the team would continue on the napkin sketch that got most votes. And that would be the first direction. So now everybody is working on one bold strategy. So we'd continue with 4 strategic prototypes. So we'd go further in the playbook. Now I'll show you a second thing that we did. You can see here they had to then do the customer profile. You know that stuff. If you don't, Google it. We wrote a whole book on that. But then what we did is we got them to make the value proposition more explicit. So now it will become tangible. What value does this strategy include? And we wouldn't use the value proposition canvas, which was a more technical tool. We'd use a tool called customer value scenes. And what we would get people to do is to simply map out 3 images. The first one, moment of need. Here's a customer with a specific situation, specific need. Picture number 2, today. What kind of choices does that customer have? What kinds of solutions already exist? And then image 3, with your bold strategy and your bold new value proposition, what would the world look like for your customer? How are you solving their problems? So if I give you a silly example, so this is a theoretical one, obviously I can't show you what they came up with because then I'd kind of violate our NDA. If I take Uber before it existed, the moment of need is, hey, I need a car, and back then it was still taxis, and you would get desperate by finding a taxi, and then it would be painful with the credit card and everything, explaining where you want to go. And of course, once you have this service, it looks a lot easier because everything is done on one app. So that's a value scene. Very powerful tool that we don't just use in strategy, but in prototyping in general. So that would be their way of making strategy explicit. So if we go further into timeline, I'm going to go to the afternoon session and just show you how we got them to quickly prototype numbers. We'd keep it super simple. So after they did a business model canvas, we'd get them to do a back of the napkin number sketch, and we'd simply get them to do revenues. How much revenue would this bold strategic move generate? How much cost would that generate? And in blue, do we have any investments that we need to make that work? So that is basically kind of how we got them to work through this presentation. And the last piece I'll show you, super powerful tool for any strategy session so that you can turn blah, blah, blah into very, very quick feedback, is when they presented this 5-minute presentation. After each presentation, everybody from the leadership team who was listening would give feedback. But here's what's important. If you open up the feedback to conversation, will be blah, blah, blah. So we use Edward de Bono's thinking hats, where in 5 minutes, you get the maximum feedback you need, and there will be no more need actually for conversation. So first, you put, metaphorically speaking, a white hat on where everybody can ask questions of clarification. So here the team that was presenting would answer questions around the bold strategic move. Then 1 minute of black hat feedback where everybody could shoot holes in the bold strategic move and the team would not be allowed to answer. So what you have then is a lot of feedback to improve the prototype. And you don't actually want the team to defend itself because it's all around, theory or opinions. So there's no value there. Because then the next hat is the yellow hat where everybody for a minute says why they like this idea. And why do I do the black hat first? So that it's out there, and because you want that negative energy out. Even people who like the idea should help with black hat feedback. And at the end, you finish with green hat feedback. So sorry, that's my green screen. It just went right through. Green on green screen doesn't work. So green hat feedback is how could you improve the idea. So with 5 minutes, you actually got everything you need to evaluate the bold strategic move. And then afterwards, they would either converge with democracy or conversation on which idea, which bold strategic move they would want to use, or they would go on and actually test all 4. So that's the first one for you, a playbook that we're going to give to you in 2026. You already get the slides here. And I'll hand it right back to Tendai for the state of strategy.
Hey Alex, yeah, no, thank you. Just a quick comment on like how powerful that De Bono's hats is, right? Like people like to do a lot of blah blah, but once you structure the conversation, it becomes a really powerful tool to
Yeah.
actually use in
Yeah.
in
Yeah, let
in
me just
in
share you open up for one small anecdote. I actually worked with, I told you, I did a strategy session for this 40 billion euro consumer goods company. And their deputy CEO wrote me a message afterwards and said, how did you get everybody to just be quiet for 5 minutes and take in that feedback? Black Hat, where people would destroy their idea. Extremely powerful, extremely powerful.
Yes, no, truly powerful. Thanks, Alex. So before we move on to talk about this data strategy, I'd like to do two Menti polls, one after the other, because we actually skipped one earlier on. So if you can go to menti.com and actually put in this code, and also if you can also scan the QR code, but the code, if you go to menti.com, is 777 and then 8348. So let me pull up the Menti now and see if you can respond to these two questions that we would like to actually ask you. So the first question is, how is your company strategy? So you can score each one of these using the slider from strongly disagree to strongly agree. You can talk about whether or not you have do you have a clear vision for the future in your organization? Is your strategy explicit about where to play, or has your strategy been shared and communicated widely? And you can see these just, start to come up, Alex. It seems as if, the sharing and communicating widely might be the thing that's like happening the least. But there's a pretty balanced score around having a clear view of the future. It seems like somewhere in the middle there.
I do this actually quite a lot. I go into a company and ask, well, what's your strategy? To the team, to the teams. And yeah, very often they can't answer and they kind
Yeah.
of vaguely say something. So it's pretty rare that we have a strong, explicit strategy, and it's even more rare that people remember. I think there's an art there of crafting strategy, but also an art of communicating strategy.
Yeah, exactly. And you can see that it's somewhere in the middle. Some companies have a clear vision of the future. They're explicit about where to play, and then communication might be a little lower. Okay, cool. Thanks everyone for responding to that. Now let me ask you the next question, which is kind of more pertinent to what I'm about to talk about with you, which is take a moment to reflect on what applies to the strategy sessions that you have been part of. So, if you've been part of a strategy session, what have you seen happen, right? Are decisions mostly driven by budgets and financial targets? Are decisions based on a point of view about the future and how to get there? Our conversations are structured, moving from topic to topic, or our conversation structured actually in a workshop that is well facilitated. You can pick more than one of these, by the way. So just looking forward to seeing what you're seeing there. And again, it's interesting. The two high scoring categories are decisions driven by budgets and financial targets, and conversations unstructured, moving from topic to topic. But there is and the lowest scoring is structured conversations that are well facilitated.
Related to
Right.
that, there's actually Sandra made a comment and said, "Oh, strategy sprints with broad co-creation are very popular, but some strategists argue that this can lead to groupthink and diluted strategy." I'd absolutely
Mm,
agree with that, though. So one of the things is that you need to make this very clear
yeah.
that strategy is not about consensus per se, right? But I do think if you create that input channel and you do co-creation, you get buy-in, even if there's a small group of people that ultimately decides and crafts the strategy. I mean, imagine
Mhm.
no startup would survive without strong kind of founder or co-founding group. But the more you get people to buy in, the better, right? So one does not exclude the other. Co-creation, I believe, is mandatory, right? And Tenda, you're
Yeah.
the expert on buy-in.
Yeah, no, that's something I've been working on for the last few weeks. I think you do need co-creation to create buy-in, but if you facilitate it well, then you're far more likely to get good outcomes. And that's why we've been trying to build these kind of structured playbooks. Now, why is it that the work that Alex has just shown you has a powerful effect on people? Like, what is the reason for that? Actually, I was in a meeting. I was invited to observe a board meeting before I facilitated a strategy session. And they wanted me to see how they kind of handle their own strategy conversations. And what I discovered sitting in there was like people move from like high level vision to implementation details within the same conversation, just up and down, these different levels of granularity. Someone might say something like, Egypt is a growing market, and I think we should go there. And then immediately somebody else will respond to that by saying, yes, and I think this particular product would be perfect in that market. So they've gone from discussing the value of being in a particular market, and now they're down in the granular details about a product. And then somebody else will say immediately within that same conversation, didn't we decide last year that we're only going to grow in our existing market? So now they're back at an even higher level conversation. But nobody follows up on that conversation because another person says, well, actually, Egypt is really hard to reach customers there anyway. So they're going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And what you end up with is just somebody else says blah, blah, blah. Another person says blah, 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 blah. Another person says blah, 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 blah. And this is unstructured conversational style gets really, really frustrating. And often it's really difficult to make decisions. And so one of the values that we bring as strategizer is this ability to help you structure these conversations. And then what's also interesting, observing how strategy is done in organizations, it's kind of related to what Roger Martin said, which is most organizations don't actually, they think they have a strategy, but they don't actually have one. What they do have is a budget with just a set of tactics that are attached to it. And what tends to happen is, well, is people just go, the strategy is you have to hit last year's revenue plus 5%. And then you have to go figure out how you do it, but that's the goal. And so that becomes really hard in terms of designing strategy. Another thing that I've observed is, some people just build their strategy based on financial data. So they'll look at size of business, they'll look at the size of the market, and they'll have those two numbers, and then they'll map their businesses, and they'll just go, okay, well, what do we do for each one of these businesses in each one of these contexts? And that's a lot because that actually means that leaders are not making choices, and that's exactly what Roger Martin also describes, right? Leaders keep avoiding making choices. They want to hedge. They want to keep all their options open, so they end up with no strategy at all. Whereas when we say you have a strategy, it means you've actually made a choice about where to play. What are the things you're giving up? What are the things that you're actually going to double down on and focus on as bold strategic moves? And then finally, people have plans, but a plan is not strategy. Again, a plan is a set of activities. When you make a strategy, you have to make a set of choices around business model, value proposition, markets that actually uniquely position you to win within your business context. And so it's really important that we keep thinking about this the right way, and that's why we would like to drive companies to actually do modern strategy. And so, Alex, you're the modern strategy expert. And so I'll hand over to you. You might need to move your slides forward a little bit there in the background. But what is modern strategy about, and how do we have a conversation about that
I
with our
I was
with our
stuck
leaders?
in the conversation. That's why I'm still stuck on
Uh,
two, but
you,
let me
yeah,
kind
you're
of
like
get right
you
to.
you're in the chat having conversations.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting, right? Around, do companies have a strategy or not? And I was just saying, I think the gap is actually not necessarily just knowledge about strategies, the ability to have good structured conversations about around difficult topics like strategy. So one of the things I just want to go back to what we often say, and you've seen us talk about this a lot, is this modern strategy for us is this ability to operate in the world of exploration. Those are the world of new ideas, of new things that we haven't done so far, and operate in the world of running your business. And mostly strategies become kind of tactical plans on the right hand side. Now, what you really want to understand is strategy is the whole range about what are the new ideas that we want to explore, building on the assets that you have, like a brand, like customers, maybe intellectual property, and then scaling that. But then, of course, also managing the existing, protecting what you have. Now, the smallest concern for us is the one on the right, because people are actually pretty good at protecting, maybe not renewing and reinventing, but protecting. And the example that we kind of like to use just to illustrate the strategic perspective is Ping An and the trajectory they had maybe in the last couple of years, not the same thing, but when they really launched this dual strategy where they focused on improving their core business, so their core life insurance, casualty insurance, banking, and asset management, and at the same time improving the left-hand side Explorer. So they would focus on improve, but the strategic direction was these technologies here are going to change the world. So we better start using them. So they invested in those technologies, but they didn't stop there. That was the point of view. The second part of the point of view was it's not going to be enough to just improve. So their founder, Peter Ma, he said, we actually need to start building internet companies in these spaces, fintech, healthcare, automobile, and smart city. So that's exactly what they did. They improved what they had and they invested into the future. Very, very powerful. So they invested 10% of their profits and into investing into the future. So clearly, they had a point of view. They made strategic choices around technologies, but also around where to play. And that's really kind of a big theme for Roger Martin. And we used Roger Martin because he has very interesting views on strategy. And he really emphasized that a brilliant strategy is worthless without the courage to make real choices, strategic choices, and then put resources behind them. And that definitely happened at Ping An. Now, a second company, and I have a video, but I just realized that I don't have the sound, so I'm gonna skip the video part. But is Logitech when Bracken Darrell was managing the organization, and though he's never been an entrepreneur like Peter Ma, because Peter Ma started Ping An from scratch, he is a very entrepreneurial CEO, and he focuses a lot of his time on the future. Now, the key thing, and here's where Logitech made bold strategic choices, is he talks about trees, plants, and seeds. And what he means with that is that their core business back then, when he was kind of reframing it, was computer peripherals. And he said that tree is going to fall, so we better invest in the plants and in the seeds while we're running our business. And what they would do is invest an important part of their resources into the future. That was the bold strategic move. And what they invested in here were things like PC gaming, were things like speakers. Booming music industry, or at least music listening, the music industry, different story, but making these bold strategic choices. So that, philosophy that he always had at Logitech, trees, seeds, tree, plants, and seeds, and shifting the resources from one to another is very, very powerful. So that's also, there's another story there between, Kodak that disappeared and Fujifilm that dramatically shifted the resources out of analog film. Those are strategic choices that these companies made. Over to you, Tendai, for another little bit of participation.
Exactly. So now I'm really interested in, with what Alex has shown us, if you can go to Menti and really let's just see where your strategy is. Like what is your strategy actually focused on as an organization? So again, Menti.com, use code 777-8348 or scan the QR code. And please tell us, what is your strategy what is strategy in your company actually, more focused on? Is it mostly focused on improving the existing business, or is it focused on, bold future-facing moves? And you can kind of move that, back and forth just so that we can see what the balance of strategy making is, right? Are people really engaged in modern strategy? One of the conversations that I often have with different kinds of leaders, Alex, is when strategy making is like stewardship, right? One part of it is keeping the lights on, and the other part of it is navigating the organization into the future. And a lot of the time, leaders get focused a lot on keeping the lights on, keeping the lights on, keeping the lights on. And here, this is a score out of 10, by the way. You can see that it's like 3.9, which means that
Wow.
the vast majority of strategy making
Yeah.
is about improving the
Yeah.
existing business.
And
Yeah.
and and the thing to emphasize, right, with keeping the lights on is that we do need to keep the lights on. There's no compromise there. So what we're saying
Yeah.
is that you cannot compromise on running the business. The problem is that the core business creates antibodies. And You know, Aidan McCullen, a friend of ours, named this the Osterwalder law, which is always fun. If somebody, coins a law around you, and the law is that your current business model is going to kill anything that looks different. So it takes an active effort to
Yes.
create anything. So bottom up, growth, very cool, but it will not happen with top down protection. And those bold strategic protections and moves need to come from the top. And that's something that I don't think we see enough.
Exactly. Okay, cool. So now that we've done a little bit of context setting, I'm about to share with you one playbook that I ran inside a large organization, and then Alex will show you another playbook to kind of wrap up this session. We're trying to keep everything practical to give you some key takeaways about ways you could actually run and drive these conversations. So the organization that I was working with, for context, it was a over 100-year-old successful global pharmaceutical organization. They're quite good at creating innovative medicines. They have a really nice portfolio of innovative and breakthrough medicines that they put out there in the world. They also have quite a good portfolio of generic medicines, which is also a significant part of their business. And the way they run their companies, they're consistently focused on improving margins. Like margins are everything. They really are really focused on not just revenue growth, but also making sure that they have really great margins as they grow that revenue. And then in terms of context, there were now new strong entrants into the market, particularly in the market of generic medicines that they were getting concerned about. And this was kind of starting to shrink the margins in that part of the business. But they were also noticing a lot of growth in Asia, particularly for their innovative medicines. And there was now uncertainty on like the kinds of new business models that they could actually explore. And so we had a in-person session. This happened very quickly, so we didn't get a chance to actually build the playbook on the platform. I had to deliver it in-house, but again, we're going to move all these onto the platform so that they're playbooks that people can run. So the first thing we focused on this playbook was helping them map their business environment and seeing what their business environment is like. And then from the business environment, we helped them score the disruption risks that the business was facing. And then we came up with strategic moves on the exploit side of their business and strategic moves on the explore side of their business. And then we did some feedback and prioritization before we started talking about any capabilities gaps they have between the strategy that they've prioritized and what they can actually do to sort of implement that strategy. And to drive the conversation around business environment, you can see this is our business environment canvas. The business model canvas is right there in the middle, and then you can start to map, things like industry forces that could be impacting your business. You can also map key trends that could be impacting your business, like regulation and socioeconomic trends. You can also map market forces like new entrants or switching costs of revenue attractiveness. And then finally, macroeconomic factors such as global market conditions or things that are happening in the capital market. So all we made them do after they'd already mapped their business model, we then made them map all these trends that are kind of impacting their business. And then the ultimate goal of like mapping all this was then for them to be able to score the disruption risks that their business is actually facing. And so we have a tool that we've created called the disruption risk assessment, and you can use this to actually map the disruption risks. And here's a quick example for you of like one section where you can see here that the team is mapping what's happening to the front stage of their business. New entrants are gaining traction. The markets in which we're active in are now projected to shrink. Trends are now reducing friction for our customers to leave us. And also, there's a lot of trends that are emerging that are sort of pushing our customers away from us. So they can actually score this. And once they've scored this, right, this then forms the basis of the conversation about bold strategic moves. Because what you the thing that's really interesting about strategy conversations is a lot of them sometimes happen just out in the air or without people thinking about the environment or what they're trying to actually respond to. And so that's why sometimes we start with this conversation, because then we know what to prioritize. So we can start to design these bold strategic moves. And How do we get people to actually think about these bold strategic moves? Well, we try and get them unstuck. And the way we get them unstuck is by we look for ways to inspire their thinking. So rather than just making them come up with things on their own, we find ways to inspire their thinking. And we want to inspire their thinking in terms of the exploit portfolio of their business and also exploring new opportunities. So when it came to inspiring their thinking around improving their core business, we focused on the generics and we inspired them using Clayton Christensen thinking and the advice that he gave to Andy Grove, which was if you are actually really doing well with a high-end product, right? And that's your most profitable product. But what you're seeing are new entrants that are coming into your business with a low-end product. One way to protect yourself from low-end disruption is to maybe launch a version of a low-end product yourself. So that's like a strategic move that you can pull. And then what we do is we then give them trigger questions that they can think about, such as how could you disrupt yourselves in your generic business? How could you serve your low-end customers while also maintaining your high-end business? And then they sort of capture those, ways they think that that could happen, and that becomes inspiration for strategic moves that they could pull. And then when it comes to thinking about the explore side or exploring new opportunities, we tend to drive strategic thinking here, or at least when I did this workshop, using what we call business model epicenters as a way to kind of trigger them into thinking about what they can do. So we use the business model canvas, and then we focus on these epicenters. And these epicenters can be customer driven, which is the front stage of the business model, or they can be resource driven, which is the backstage of the business model, or we can focus on the finance driven epicenter, which is around the profit formula. So, for example, on the customer centered or on the customer driven epicenter, what we try to get them to do is to sort of ask them, well, we show them an example of a company like M-Pesa, and then we ask them to think about how they can tap into new or underserved markets with large potential, how they can increase market access by building direct channels to their end customers. So they're coming up with these ideas themselves. And in the backstage, right, we can have them kind of, we give them the example of ways, and then we ask them how they could create more value for their customers by performing new activities, or how they can leverage their IP, for example, a business model in maybe in markets where IP is difficult to protect. Like how can you do that? That's a way of sort of thinking about making these bold strategic moves. And then finally, from a finance-driven perspective, we can show them how Hilti shifted their revenue, and then have them think about how they can increase value to customers without increasing costs or different revenue streams that they can be thinking about. And actually, what they have is this workbook with those trigger questions, and then a space for them to capture those bold ideas. And then after they've captured their bold ideas, it's now time for them to actually, after pushing them to sort of make these bold decisions, then we help them focus, make decisions about what they should be doing next, right? And I just sort of straight stole this from Alex's slide when I was doing the workshop and just had them do again, the four thinking hats to give each other feedback. But beyond that, I also borrowed a tool from Amach Ruba and Sharon Tal, which has got these four categories about, the potential of a particular strategic move, but also the challenges that you might face in executing that strategic move. And something that's got a lot of potential but very little challenge is something that you can call a gold mine. And something that's very challenging but it's got little potential, that's questionable. Why would you ever do that, right? And then of course moonshots have high potential and high challenge. And so, you can imagine that if you've got a whole bunch of strategic opportunities here, I kind of adapted them and changed their names. But then we get them to score and kind of map these together onto this particular point of view, and then start making decisions about what they want to pursue now, what they want to keep open so that they can pursue later, and what they just want to place in storage and not work on at all. So just using these dimensions and scorecards and facilitation, people can actually start to make these strategic choices. And only after they've made these strategic choices do we then start addressing their capability gaps. So you can see you go from environment to vision to designing bold moves to making decisions about the moves, and then capability gaps. You don't discuss a bold move and then discuss a capability gap within that same like conversation. We want the conversation structured. So, we know that if you're doing a different strategy, any shift in strategy reveals those capability gaps. So how do you adapt? So we give them again, a playbook where they can capture the gaps that they're noticing and think about how they're going to actually bridge those gaps as an organization. And so that's kind of like, the playbook that I ran there with this particular group. And they found it quite powerful because it stopped them from veering off in different directions and made them focus a little bit. Thoughts, Alex? Thoughts?
I love this because I can clearly see, right, when you showed how they had this unstructured conversation. So same people, right, super smart, they have all the knowledge, but nobody designed the session. Nobody
Yes.
facilitated the session. And that's the only thing between a world-class strategy and a blah blah conversation. You have the
Yeah.
same time, you don't need more money. And that's what blows me away, right? And we've been always so good at doing these things, but it kind of hit me this year that, that skill, we can make it accessible by kind of democratizing it, by putting this into playbooks and sharing these, because it's not rocket science, but you still need to know how to design and facilitate these sessions. But once you have the design,
Exactly.
the rest is pretty straightforward, right?
Exactly. And you have one more playbook to show, right?
I
Just
have
a quick
one
one.
more
Yeah.
playbook to show. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So I'm going to quickly run through this, so we might take one or two questions. So in this case, this was a very large company. I did a strategy session with their entire company, 40 billion euro. And based on that, and I won't show that playbook, so a bit more particular, I'll show you the playbook that I did at the end of the summer for their biggest division, which is around 16 billion. And what we did there is kind of looking at their categories. They used to be the growth engine of the company. They've been leading in the category for ages. It used to outperform the market, but not anymore. And more distant from the consumer. Why? Because once you have a growth engine, you just become an execution machine, and that automatically pulls you away from the customer. So if we look at the environment, there's just a constant stream of new market entrants. A lot of them die, but then new ones come up, and they all go from zero to hundreds of millions very quickly, disappear. But that made the market a lot more competitive than ever before. So it became a lot harder for them to outcompete the market, which their investors got used to. And then, of course, there's high use of social media and direct sales platforms. So the competitors are much closer to the consumer than them. So I had the task to run a session on bold strategic moves that are consumer centric. So completely different playbook. As you can see, every session, every kind of context requires a different playbook. Same tools, different design. So you'll see this is actually pretty straightforward, not super complicated, but really, really powerful, and they like that. So we had four teams, like before, two teams, different context, no constraints. Two teams had to fix a market, so each one got one market, had to fix it, and then two teams were about entering a market. So we had to come up with four bold strategic moves and not choose between the four, but kind of have a conversation if these were good moves to fix the markets and to enter in a market. So what did we do? First thing, simply assess our business model in light of the market changes in each one of these markets, the ones to fix, the ones to enter. Then we mapped out a consumer profile for each scenario. They went and did a napkin sketch, same thing that we've seen before. Then they would pick one of the bold strategic moves. Like before, they would pick one napkin sketch. And for that, they would use the business model canvas to sketch out the go-to-market for each one of those bold strategic moves. And then the last thing, presentation, feedback, alignment. And again, we'd obviously use the De Bono thinking hats because they're so powerful. So if I kind of visualize the playbook in terms of the tools and the process, and here we had actually just from 9 to 4 o'clock, because then they went on for some sightseeing. So they had to really push this one in. It was the end of a 3-day strategy session offsite for their division. So first thing, we just did an assessment, very short, 30 minutes, of the front stage of the business model for each market. Second, we zoomed right into the consumer. We did around 30 minutes, mapped out the consumer. We had the right people in the room who know the consumers. Three, they would then do the napkin sketches like I illustrated before. They would share those napkin sketches, pick one like we did before. And now here's where it'd be a little bit different. So they didn't go into deep numbers, etc. They just had to map out the go-to-market strategy. My preference would have been to add the numbers as well. Simply didn't have the time. And then the last session was about giving feedback, white hat, black hat, yellow hat, and green hat. Somebody was asking 5 minutes per hat. Not a chance, because you actually don't need that much time. The white hat questions of clarifications, it's about 2 minutes. You don't put a timer. For the black hat, you say 1 minute and then get everyone go. People will say, no recurring revenues, small market, I'm not sure we have the capability. So it'd be very short and you'd get like 20 feedbacks in 1 minute. Same for yellow, same for green. So you keep it to 1 minute and you facilitate really strongly so that the team doesn't respond. That is very powerful. So after all of that, you might have learned a couple of things from Tendai and myself. We got to do all these sessions based on a lot of scars, knowing what works and what doesn't. And we hope you'll benefit from this, because we're going to put out not just all our playbooks for one fee and one person, $300, bring your team of 5, 3 times 300. We're going to put all our playbooks, including all of our strategy playbooks, what you've seen today. Because our goal is not just to do services with large organizations, but really to democratize everything that we've learned over the last decade and more. Tendai, anything you want to add before we already have the feedback up? I think we can shift to the feedback. Jerry, we asked already if you want us to contact you. Maybe we put the poll up of what you thought of this session. Maybe we can go to the
Yeah,
next poll. Yeah, cool.
exactly. No, this was really fun. It's the first time we've kind of opened up our process and for strategy design and kind of shared it in this way. I must say that I have been surprised by the reaction that we've gotten from leaders when we've run these sessions in this structured way. They seem to be quite pleased with the outcome. I remember boldly declaring that maybe there's a way to do strategy that's just not about like long plans, long decks, but actually people actively working together and making decisions in context, right?
Yeah. And what has been kind of enlightening for me is that our ability to structure the conversation and to get them somewhere, and we don't necessarily have an opinion on the market per se, because we rarely know those markets, but we do have opinions on, are they bold enough? Are they pushing? We have very good, strong questions just based on the frameworks we use. And
Yeah.
ultimately, they'll get to much better decisions. Not because we're smarter, it's just we know how to run a session, right?
Exactly. No, we don't even need to know that. We need to know some detail about the business, but not they know their business. We just facilitate the session. Nyarazo, who is a Zimbabwean like me, is asking a question of, is there no risk following this process that then finance people say they can't fund choices that haven't been proposed probably by them? My answer would be make sure that everyone is involved in the conversation, right? Don't just hold the conversation without involving as many people as actually
Right.
possible. Yeah.
Right. They have to be, and you need to have the right, I'd expand that. You need the right the right people in these strategy sessions, because sometimes it's about the technical R&D capabilities, sometimes it's about the market. And then one of the big things that we didn't go into, strategies should be bold, which also means they should be tested, right? So not all strategies need immediately big funding. They actually need quick experimentation.
Yes, yes. And just to compliment there, Alex, Steve Grady says, great webinar. You're on the right track with playbooks to make your methodologies and tools more
Very cool.
accessible.
Very cool. Yeah, and
That's
we're
a very
really
good.
excited about sharing these. So some people were asking, when are they accessible? Look, we've been doing a lot of delivery, so we haven't been as good as we wanted. Some
Mhm.
pre-purchased some of the playbooks that we haven't finished yet. Some of those are 100% on me, but a lot coming in 2026. So sign up now. Prices might rise, right? So
This is the time to get us while we're still weak.
exactly. Use your
Yeah.
budgets. A lot of you still have budgets for the end of the year. So cool.
Exactly. No, thank you everyone for joining. And Alex, thank you for such a great and wonderful conversation. I wish everyone a lovely break. Whatever you're doing, make sure you stay safe and healthy. And yeah, thank you. We'll see you soon.
It was a real pleasure doing this with you, Tendai. So I can now call you, I can still call you little brother, right? Because you're the older
Exactly. You
brother
were
to
here
me.
before me, but nobody else was. So I'm now the oldest serving member of Strategyzer. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the holidays. Bye
Bye
bye.
bye. Bye bye.